Hello, everybody. As I think I mentioned in class, I'm pre-recording today's lecture. I'll post it before class on the 18th. Today's the 17th, but probably the 18th for you. So, usually we sort of hang out and talk to each other a little bit. Today's class will be a bit shorter because there will not be any discussion component. I'll just do the lecture part so you get the material that I would have covered otherwise. And like I said, I have an appointment tomorrow, so I can't come to class. So here we go. Last time we talked about meditation. We went over a few different kinds of meditation. We tried meditation ourselves. It technically did not call itself mindfulness-based stress reduction, but I would argue that's basically what it was, right? So maybe you remember there was this body scan, body awareness component to it. So part of it was just, let's get back in touch with our bodies and see how we're feeling, right? And then another component was paying attention to your breath. And so that is just focusing your concentration. So both of these put together is basically mindfulness meditation. So that, it's a popular kind of meditation, like we talked about last time. It was developed to be sort of a secular type of meditation, even though it is often associated with Buddhism. The founder, John Kabat-Zinn, basically said he wanted to make a meditation without the Buddhism, something to that effect. So that's what mindfulness-based stress reduction was. As we talked about last time, meditation existed in the world, all over the world, well before the Buddha was born. And so there are long traditions of meditation. And the Buddha, when he came, he sort of developed his own, but also these other older ones were also adapted by Buddhism. So maybe it shouldn't come as a big surprise that we get these adaptations in our own modern world, right? And if we think about kind of what does this mindfulness-based stress reduction do for us, it really is addressing the problems of our present day. I think something that we talk about quite often is how tired we are, how stressed we are, particularly this year, right? We have very few tools to deal with the stresses and the anxieties of our lives. And mindfulness-based stress reduction is designed to give us tools to deal with these things. Something we also talked about is how if they're presented in the wrong way, if they're used for purposes that are, let's say, not exactly wholesome, right? So let's say you guys are all tired and I'm your boss and I say, all right, let's try to focus on our work. I know your mental health is a little precarious right now, so why don't we do something about it? And you guys say, yeah, give us a little more money, give us a little more time off, give us some benefits, respect us as people rather than just nameless workers. And I would say, no, how about some mindfulness meditation so you don't complain as much, and then we can all get back to work, right? So as we strip the Buddhism away from it, it also sort of becomes a tool that could be used for whatever purpose we choose, right? Which, frankly, is characteristic of how Buddhism has been adapted to American sensibilities. And I think the Headspace app, the Headspace program that we were exploring last time is a perfect example of this. It's basically, you've got Andy Puttycombe, who has trained in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and maybe you can tell I'm a little resentful of this. He basically strips Tibet away from the practice. He strips Buddhism away from the practice, and he basically says, listen to my soothing British voice and buy my app. And so it has become a product to be bought and sold. And so even though we might look at it as some sort of value neutral product, it actually has been given the values of whatever neoliberal capitalism in which we live today. So that's my take on mindfulness-based stress reduction. I think it is useful. I think it is good to be able to reduce your stress. I wouldn't necessarily recommend buying the app from Puttycombe, but I think there are some things of value there too. So if we go back into kind of the history of the different meditations that people were doing a bit longer before Puttycombe came around, they're basically two primary kinds. So one is this calming meditation. We talked about this last time. You develop state of concentration, mental absorption. The other one is more analytical, and you try to develop some sort of understanding, and then these are often used in combination with each other. So just a bit more on calming meditation. I want to focus on this because we'll see something very similar in today, in the new material for today. There's this promise of kind of magic powers. They don't use the word magic here, but that's basically what it's promising. Another way to think about it is the ability to sort of predict the future and to see what is happening now. There's a term that's very common in Buddhist texts, which is to know the three times, which I think I brought up before. It's basically this idea of becoming omniscient, which is one aspect of enlightenment, you might remember. The other aspect, of course, is the end of suffering. And like we talked about, this will not necessarily end suffering. These special powers of being able to like read people's thoughts and stuff. So when we read the life story of the Buddha, he abandoned these approaches. These are the practices that he did with his teachers and colleagues in the woods, right? The ascetics in the woods. And so then he ultimately decided, you know what? This will not lead to enlightenment. I'm going to move on from this. And we got a little glimpse of this. It was just a little nod. I think if you go back to the life story of the Buddha, you might notice discussions of these higher jhanas, these higher levels of concentration, things about infinite consciousness and neither perception nor non-perception. I'm pretty sure those are explicitly named in the book. So it's all just to say the Buddha tried this. He's very good at it. And he ultimately decided this is not the path. We need to do something else. So what did he say we should do? Is we need to observe, right? And this is kind of appealing to the scientist in me, right? Where you want to kind of objectively observe phenomena. And you might be wondering, how do you objectively observe phenomena? And arguably you cannot, right? So you're always going to be subjective. But at the same time, this is still encouraging observation, observing your body and your mind. And so we go back to Puttycomb, you know, the body awareness is sort of like an insight meditation, and the focus on the breath is sort of like a calming meditation. It just, the objects are very consciously chosen as being somewhat neutral and somewhat secular objects. So when we combine these things, again, you can be sort of creative with it, right? You can combine one sort of analysis of impermanence, for example. Again, something we've said a lot in this course is that things are impermanent and yet we don't recognize them as such. Even though I've taught this class for several years now, I still have problems with this, right? When things end, when I don't get what I want, when something I love goes away, my heart is broken nonetheless. And yet, shouldn't I have seen it coming, right? And so, how do you train yourself to see these things coming? Is through meditation, right? One thing we said before is meditation is familiarizing yourself with something, familiarization. And so you can familiarize yourself with impermanence. Other things you could familiarize yourself with is loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity. So let's say there's some wholesome emotion you want to develop. Let's say there's maybe a person who bugs you, and maybe something they do, maybe it's something they are, right? Maybe you guys are competing for something and you're jealous of them, or you have a weird feeling about them. Once you notice that you have this weird feeling, there are things you can do about it, right? So I don't think I went into this last time. There's a meditation where you can imagine someone you love. And so this is like a cultivating love, cultivating compassion meditation. Those are actually slightly different things, but they're often put together. Love is, according to the Buddhist definition, is hoping that somebody is happy and has, you know, happiness and the causes of happiness. Whereas compassion is hoping that someone does not suffer and does not have the causes of suffering. But obviously those often go together. So yeah, let's say there's someone who causes us problems. You know, maybe they're not your enemy, but they're your opponent. There's somebody you compete with. Frankly speaking, I can imagine some people like this in my own life. So that's what I'm thinking about right now. And so what you can imagine is you can think of someone you love, right? Someone you feel close to, someone you trust. Often a family member is recommended. I recognize not everybody has great relationships with their family members, so it doesn't have to be a family member. It could be a good friend, whatever. Somebody you feel close, trusting, love, right? And a wholesome sort of love. So you can begin with that. Then imagine someone who's sort of neutral to you. This is playing with different categories of people, right? Someone who's neutral, maybe you've seen them before, maybe they, swipe your card at the dining hall or whatever, just some random person that you don't know particularly well, you don't have strong feelings about them. This would be a neutral person, right? And again, this is playing with categories of people and our relationships with people, which we usually hold as sort of solid, like this is really a thing, and there's nothing I can do about it. But of course, as we talked about with Buddhist philosophy, nothing is solid, right? Everything exists in this sort of empty state. And so you can dissolve these relationships and build them back up again however you want. And that's what meditation plays with. So you dissolve the neutrality. That's not so hard to do because neutral is sort of a non-state anyway. And then you can try to build up love for this person, right? You can imagine, what if this person was very kind to me at some point, maybe in a past life or something like that. I'm sure they have loved ones in their life who feel very loving toward them, right? And so you can imagine, what would it be like if I had this kind of this springing forth of love, this gushing love for this person? And obviously, again, it doesn't have to be any sort of romantic love or anything like that. It's more like you want them to be happy, you don't want them to suffer, you want them to be good, right? You want them to have good things happen to them. You wish them well, right? And again, this is all just sort of an imagination exercise. And then the third category, of course, is that person who's causing problems for you. And you can do that same exercise. It's like, okay, yeah, we're competing for this thing, but is that the only way to think about this person? Of course not. Do they have parents who love them? A mother who gave birth, siblings, perhaps, friends, people who respect that person, who look to that person for support and help, and perhaps this person even supports and helps that community. And could I potentially see this person as an ally rather than as an opponent? See this person as someone I could love, I could appreciate, I could wish them well, at the very least not wish them harm, right? And not wish that they fail. If they achieve good things, can I learn to be less jealous and more, there's this term, sympathetic joy, right? Can I celebrate their wins, right? Rather than celebrate their losses? It's something that takes time, it takes practice. But frankly, if you want to be sort of satisfied in this world of competition and this world of jealousy and all the other things that our world is quite full of, these are skills we must learn how to do, right? How to cultivate these sorts of positive emotions. And so, of course, once you cultivate this feeling like, yeah, maybe I could love this person and have compassion for this person, have sympathetic joy for this person, you sit with it, right? Then you go back to the calming meditation and you try to cultivate this feeling. So hopefully that makes sense. We covered this last time, but maybe not in any great depth. I think we ran out of time. So so that's an overview of how does meditation work in Buddhism. Is you develop some sort of feeling, then you sit with that feeling. MBSR, the mindfulness-based stress reduction, and Headspace and all that, they do versions of this, especially if you watch the Netflix ones. But they're cultivating things that Americans tend to find less threatening. We'll see some threatening things in a moment. This is why I'm sort of bracing you. It's more like gratitude, right? Have you guys ever done a gratitude meditation? Which again, I shouldn't make fun of it because it is good to be grateful. It just feels so very damn American. we love being like hashtag blessed, grateful, Thanksgiving kind of shit. And frankly, it has very little to do with Buddhism, which again maybe is the point, right? It's adapting to sort of American sensibilities, and I do resent that a little bit, but I shouldn't because we are in America after all. Okay, so the three vehicles, we've talked about this before. Theravada represents sort of this mainstream approach to Buddhism that we explored mostly in the first part of the class. There's more to it than that. We could spend an entire course just on Theravada. There's a lot we could learn about Theravada. It's the tradition I know the less about. So in my mind, we've covered it in a very brief sort of introductory way. If you're interested, though, there is more I could tell you about it. Mahayana, as we said, is the greater vehicle. That's what we've been doing more recently. There are these developments of wisdom, developments of the perfections, the bodhisattva. And then finally, Vajrayana we have not covered yet, and that's what we will do today. As you can see, there's an emphasis on ritual, on power. So Vajrayana is a term that has many syllables. Sometimes it's called Tantric Buddhism, sometimes it's called esoteric Buddhism. Vajrayana, I would translate as the adamantine vehicle, but this term Vajra, right? So we've seen Mahayana, Yana means vehicle. Vajra is difficult to translate. It's a thunderbolt, it's indestructibility, it's power, it's sort of all these things. Let's see, can we zoom in on this Vajra? You can sort of see it. Why don't I find a Vajra for you guys? Let's get a new window. So just bear with me, please. I spelled that wrong. Vajra. So yeah, here's a Vajra, Dorje in Tibetan, a ritual weapon symbolizing properties of a diamond. So that's that adamantine, indestructible. I don't like diamond because there is another word for diamond, and so that's a pretty bad translation. Thunderbolt is better. Irresistible force, I like that. So it used to be a weapon, right? It used to be bigger. Then it sort of shrunk down and it became more symbolic than anything else, right? So you can see the basic structure is you have these kind of rings coming together on each end, and then there's sort of a solid part in the middle. So this is called a Vajra. It's again, it's a symbol of power. And this guy has one in his hand. And in fact, that is what his name means. His name is Vajrapani. And we saw a bodhisattva named Vajramati in the Tathagata Sutra, right? In the Buddha Nature Sutra that we're reading before. So it's not, again, it's not a totally new idea. It just becomes more centralized. It's so central that, in fact, it's the vehicle of the Vajra, right? So this is there's an entire system built around this Vajra. So what else to say? There's meditation, there's ritual, there's yoga, there's mantra recitation. There are new goals of success, power, transformation. Previous goals, again, are not gone, right? What was the previous goal of Buddhism? Is to achieve enlightenment, of course, right? And there's this compassionate motivation that we saw in the greater vehicle to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, and those are still emphasized here. So it's not really a break from the greater vehicle as much as kind of a, let's say, an offshoot, right? So there are some who practice the greater vehicle who would not do this, but the ones who do this, the Tantric Buddhism generally still hold those same values from before. So what else is there to say? Oh yeah, and so these new goals, things like worldly success become more important. Things like power and domination and political success and military success and the transformation of oneself and one's negative emotions. All of this are sort of new goals that get brought in here that I would argue are just building on things we've already seen before. Again, just a quick reminder, here are some very early promises of powers and extrasensory perception, all this sort of thing. It was already being promised during the life of the Buddha. So we shouldn't be surprised that then certain elements or certain sects and certain traditions within Buddhism continue those sorts of pursuits. We will go over mantra in a moment, so maybe we don't need to talk about that yet. Yeah, we'll basically just talk about tantric practice today. That is the main new information. And if we were in class, I would spend some time looking at this painting with you. Let's see, can I zoom again? Yeah. Maybe ask you for your impressions, and I think this is my prediction, but you might say that guy doesn't look very Buddhist, right? He looks kind of angry. He's got sharp teeth. What's with all the arms? What's with all the fire? Is he stepping on somebody? What's the deal with that? And so, as you can see in the background, there are the more recognizable sort of peaceful Buddhas. And maybe you remember from the very beginning of class, we spent some time looking at Buddha statues, and I asked you, what makes a Buddha, right? And when you see these, you're like, yeah, that's a Buddha. This guy's not a Buddha. And technically he's a bodhisattva, but for our purposes, he's the one who's just like a very small step away. He's basically the same thing, right? He's very close to being a Buddha, except he's still more engaged with our world. We've seen a bodhisattva named Guan Yin, obviously slightly different iconography when compared to maybe the more classical Buddhas, but still pretty close, right? She's very nice, very peaceful. She's up in the room looking out for that master. Remember that video I showed you? And so here we have a figure that really breaks from all of these other aesthetics we've seen. This guy is mad. He is fierce. He is violent. He is stomping on someone, right? He's surrounded by fire, sharp teeth, scary, multiple eyes. Like this guy, when the Christians came and saw Tantric Buddhism in Asia, they were just like, who are these demon worshippers, right? And I hate to say it, but I think from sort of, let's say, our perspective, particularly in our Catholic school, it's hard to see this as anything but a demon, right? And I will say that's kind of on purpose. And so it's a little bit of an interesting aesthetic game, symbolic game, psychological game, where something that is usually pushed out, demons are bad, they belong in hell with all of these fires and that sort of stuff. God is good and the angels are good, right? This is a stark divide that we usually exist within. What Tantric Buddhism does is it tries to sort of reel these violent, sexual, polluted, negative, call it whatever you want. All this side of things that are usually left out of our sense of self, our sense of being, our sense of sacredness, of holiness. All of these things get sort of blended together, right? Rather than split them apart, they then are blended together. So there are a few words we could use to talk about Tantra. Tantra is transgressive. I would write this in the chat, but there is no chat today, so maybe I'll just say it for you. No, I could write it in the slide. Why don't we write it in the slide? So Tantra is transgressive. So that means if there are certain norms, like taboos maybe, we don't like to talk about death or violence or demons or abuse or any other bad things, and there are reasons for that, right? These are disturbing things. Tantra talks about it. Horrible stuff, right? I've done, this is the part of Buddhism I actually know the best. Really weird myths, really disturbing things, incest, cannibalism, all sorts of crazy stuff. It's all over the place, and it's really kind of baked in as a central part of tantric imaginations. It's not the only part, but transgression is a big part of it. And again, this has to do with sort of sexuality and violence. There's another word. Oh, this is esoteric as well. So this is, you could look it up. Esoteric just means kind of secret. So the opposite would be exoteric. Exoteric is what we've talked about up until this point. It's open and available to the public. Everybody can read about it and learn about it, and it's not a problem. And again, someone like Guan Yin, the Bodhisattva of compassion, very exoteric. What's not to like, right? There's this being out there who loves you and wants to protect you. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Esoteric, again, gets into the kind of murky underbelly of our being, and not everybody wants to get there, right? So it's generally kept secret, just so, I don't know, people don't write mean newspaper articles about them. I should also say, we'll talk about this more as we continue along, but because it's esoteric, it's had sort of a complicated existence in our world of free information sharing, right? So here I am, professor in a college classroom talking about these secret practices. Is this okay? It's actually morally a bit ambiguous whether or not I should be talking about this. Frankly, I am okay with it for a very specific reason. We're not going to do these practices, right? We're sort of just talking about them. I'm talking about Vajrapani. His image appears all over the place, so it's not to say you're not allowed to look at him, although there are some deities where there's like a screen over them in the monastery. You're not even supposed to see them. Vajrapani is not one of them, but there are even more intense images than this, if you can imagine. Okay, maybe that's enough of that. Tantric meditation is sort of the focus for today. We just talked about all these things. So what is Tantric meditation about? It's about power. Again, it's about transforming yourself into a powerful being. And even suggesting that, you might think, I'm not supposed to transform myself into a powerful being. Only athletes are allowed to do that, and only in a very specific, bounded environment on the football field. If they transform themselves into powerful beings outside of that place and they get violent, they'll be arrested and they'll be dragged through the mud and they'll die in jail, just like many famous football players have. So how do you do this? It's divine pride is a practice we'll talk about in a moment. You're using your body. So this is the term I used before, is mudra. I believe it shows up in the reading for today, where your hands are supposed to take, this is on page 326. There are certain hand gestures you're supposed to use. Maybe I'll just read it to you. So again, this is the 2 tantric meditations. I would have given you guys some time to work through this together, but life happens. So we're praising Tara, and we'll talk about who Tara is in a moment, but then we extend 2 middle fingers to form a wedge, bending slightly the 3 joints of these 2 fingers. One holds the 2 index fingers as if they were held at first, holding the thumbs parallel to each other. One holds the 3 joints close together, extending the 2 ring fingers to form a hollow. One joins and extends the little fingers. This is the open blue lotus hand gesture. Let's see if I can do this. I learned how to do this before, and I think I sort of forget how to do it, to be honest. And the way it's described there is really sort of opaque, isn't it? I think it's talking about this. Can you see what I'm doing here? So I'm extending I'm actually extending my ring finger. So this might not be exactly what it's talking about. But look at it. It's pretty cool, right? Somebody showed me how to do this. You put your fingers together and you make sort of a lotus shape. And it's cool to see it in this text as well. So there are all sorts of different hand gestures you can do. We've talked about some of them. Touching the earth is probably the most famous one. That's the one we've talked about, but there are many, many others. So that is one part of it, is using your body, using various positions for your body. Speech is the mantra, and so on page 326, it goes into it a bit more. It doesn't actually tell us the mantra, which is Om Tara Tu Tara Tu Soha, which is right here. So Om Tara Tu Tara Tu Soha. It might just sound like random syllables. They actually do mean things, but even people who don't understand these syllables will say them. This is sort of a complicated situation, but for example, in Tibet, they might say the Sanskrit words, even though the Sanskrit words do not have any obvious meaning to Tibetan people, they'll still say it, and it basically becomes a prayer. It's a prayer to Tara in particular. And then the mind is visualization, right? You can visualize a deity in front of you and focus your mind on that deity. So again, how do you act in Buddhism? I think I was banging on the table and saying thinking is acting. Remember that? How do you act in Buddhism? Body, speech, and mind. And all 3 of these are being used to imagine and engage with a Buddha. There are also initiation rituals in tantric meditation. So if you really want to do this sort of practice, you would need to find a qualified teacher. So teachers become important. You need to find a qualified teacher to initiate you into these secret practices. I am not a qualified teacher, so don't even try. But there are some out there, right? In fact, I have one on a video for us to talk about. And then finally, I should have written this here, mandala. Mandalas establish order between the Buddhas, right? So you get these Buddhas of the center, the Buddha of the north, south, east, west. So once you have multiple Buddhas, the question arises, what's the relationship between the Buddhas? And so then that can be decided in these sort of cosmic diagrams like a mandala, right? Where this is the most important Buddha, but these other guys are pretty cool too. Just like we saw here, this guy is the most important Bodhisattva here, but these other guys are sort of there to support him. And so here's one of Tara, where she's surrounded by all of these other beings, but she's the central one here. So we get multiple Buddhas arranged in these cosmic diagrams, and then these can also be part of the visualization practice too. We can visualize all these deities in front of us. Finally, kind of the climax of the practice is to be not just visualize, where I'm doing the thing with my body and with my speech and with my mind, it's becoming a Buddha, right? And so something I asked you last time is, what is the practice of Buddha nature? And this is kind of answering that question, right? So imagine there's some pretty provocative images. We had the gold in filth was probably the most provocative. We spent some time talking about that. There were some other ones, but imagine you have your gold and filth. It's sort of a dissatisfying prospect. It's nice that the gold is there, right? But once you have the gold there, why do you need the filth, right? Let's get rid of the filth. And so that's what this tantric meditation is all about, is it's using analogies, it's using metaphors, but then it is actualizing them within yourself right now, right? Rather than some potential that might come out later, shine every now and then. This is the fast path to enlightenment. It promises enlightenment not in some distant future life, but in this life. Enlightenment right now, right? Which is quite the promise. And other figures come to sort of criticize this approach. And so there are debates within the tradition about how appropriate these methods are. But in any case, the divine pride, you dissolve your usual identity into emptiness, which we've talked about before, and then you can build it back up as a Buddha, right? Not just seeing a Buddha, not just in the presence of a Buddha, but becoming a Buddha yourself, right? Removing the gold from the filth and becoming only the gold and getting rid of all the filth. So what was the meditation we read here? It's actually two of them, but they're basically doing the same thing. Pretty short, right? It was like 10 pages or something. And this is all dedicated to Tara, another bodhisattva. It's almost like a tantric version of Guanyin. Guanyin, it's the history of this is honestly unclear, but the Guanyin became popular in East Asia. Guanyin is a Chinese name, Kannon is a Japanese name. Tara is it is a distinct figure, but they're both these bodhisattvas of compassion, and Tara is more popular in Central Asia, in Tibet, in Mongolia, and serves a similar purpose, but in a more tantric context. So I could have chosen a different deity, but I think it's an interesting juxtaposition. We have this sort of intense, violent, transgressive tradition, but still a very calm and kind deity. Can you see that? And so there are fierce, wrathful versions of Tara, but this is not one of them, right? This is, again, sort of the peaceful, kind one. So I didn't want to scare you guys too much on our first day of Tantra. So I thought I'd give you a nice deity who you might be able to appreciate. So again, here's the mandala. Deity yoga is another term for what we were just describing, is where you identify as a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. And this is what we would have discussed had we met. I have some videos for you. And basically, it's sort of interesting to compare this with the mindfulness meditation we did last time. Maybe I'll just give you a little taste. I feel like you can watch these in your own time if you're really interested. But why don't we just check it out? Okay, so for a second. This is a guided meditation with a Tibetan Rinpoche. So Rinpoche means it literally means precious one. He's a Tibetan master. And so this is a guided green Tara meditation practice. Keep talking. He's a little bit long-winded. I hate to be disrespectful, but he goes into a lot of detail. And one thing I'll say is he seems to be describing his own visualization, right? So if I try to do this visualization, it might be just some sort of green lump and blur in front of me. But this is someone who can really see Tara right in front of himself.
Today I am speaking about Tara practice, visualization, healing practice, and recitation of the mantra of Tara. Tara is liberator. Tara means, Tibetan word is dolma. So there's a different ways of practicing Tara sadhana. Those of you have not received Tara initiation. You can visualize Tara in front of you, and then you visualize seed syllables, mantras, and lights, and you recite the mantra of Tara for the purpose of receiving blessings and inspirations and healing, and then at the end, Tara dissolving into you. And those of you who have received Tara initiations, then you can visualize yourselves as a Tara. And so this time, first, I will explain.
Maybe let's pause for a sec. If, in case you didn't catch it, he talked about the initiation, right? So if you're initiated into the secret practice, you can maybe say if you're not initiated, you should just visualize her, and that's okay to just see the deity. If you're not initiated, there's nothing wrong with visualizing a deity. But if you are initiated, then you can become her, right? Which again, we've talked about gender before. It's sort of an interesting statement about gender that you could dissolve, whether you're a man or a woman or whoever, you could dissolve yourself and become a new self, a female embodiment of enlightenment. It's kind of fascinating. Again, pretty long-winded, and I think the fact that this is just a video within a video, we don't have to watch it too much. You can see from the preview at the bottom here, you get this seed syllable. This is thumb, and so first you see this letter, and then from the letter, Tara emerges. So here's an image of Tara, and again, you can visualize her in front of you. You can visualize yourself as her. He goes into a lot of detail. The Rinpoche goes into a lot of detail about where her hand is, where her feet are, how everything sort of fits together. You can see there's a half-hour-long video, so you can check it out if you're curious. There's one more I wanted to show you. The production value is a little higher on this one. This was made in Hong Kong, and so they're speaking. It's actually, I don't know this group. They're speaking Mandarin, but if it's in Hong Kong, I'm kind of surprised it's not Cantonese, but you know, whatever. And so they start. Maybe I'll just get rid of the sound. They start with a mandala, one of these cosmic diagrams, which are usually flat, right? They're usually just a two-dimensional depiction, but there are three-dimensional connotations. And so then they transform the flat mandala. Maybe you can see Tara's here in the middle. And then they create this into a three-dimensional world, right? And again, if we take this idea of Buddha nature that we talked about before, sort of an isolated, enlightened potential that is inside all of us, why not make a whole Buddha nature house? Why not make a whole Buddha nature world, right? And so the potential behind this concept of there being some sort of enlightened principle that is secluded or is separate from the unenlightened filth that surrounds it can be applied in many different contexts. And of course, Buddhists ran with this theme to create entire worlds of enlightenment, which we'll continue to talk about later. So this is one representation of that. The seed syllable thumb shows up, I guess, on the walls here. I think there eventually is one in the middle here. It's very ornate, right? As you can see, it goes on for many minutes. Yeah, here's the one in the middle. It arises out of this beautiful flower, and there are all these nice things on the walls and stuff, very beautifully decorated. And then the practice continues. I think I had a note about when to start. Up until around here, you're imagining, again, here's a mantra, right? These are Tibetan syllables. And then this is the syllable Om, that is the beginning of many mantra recitations. And then from the Om, light rays spread out and create all of these various deities that are celebrating the arrival of the Buddha or of the Bodhisattva. I think we are supposed to be underneath here. Yeah, there's the meditator. And so you can start imagining these things over your head, right? And just like Rinpoche said, if you are initiated, you could imagine yourself as Tara, right? And if you're not initiated, you could imagine being in the presence of Tara. And there's all these different things that happen, things dissolve, things come out. There's one where like a Buddha shows up on the top of Tara's head, and so even if you are Tara, you can imagine another Buddha coming out of you, right? And so there are these sort of worlds within each other, right? It's almost like within each pore of our body, there's a world filled with enlightenment, filled with Buddhas. And so it's a total reimagining of the world in which we live. Let's see, are they doing any more? Yeah.
向自身所观的白度母如意轮座以供养，思维万法皆空，空性中显现白色的 Om 字。
Okay, so that's enough. If you're interested in these things, you can check it out later. And then for the rest of class, it'd be mostly discussion like we often do. So maybe we can just sort of wrap things up here. But some takeaways is, what are the practices? You got body, speech, and mind, and then also you have this transformation into the deity, right? We could call it deity yoga. We could call it divine pride. There's sort of two variations on the same theme. And at the very end, I encourage you to look at actually the very end of the reading is probably the juiciest part. Like 327, you get the benefits of the teaching, and you might notice it's not what Headspace is promising, which is to be more relaxed as you work your life away. And it's not what the Buddha was promising, which is enlightenment. It's actually neither of these things. It's really magic powers, right? It says empowering a weapon, using the magical eye ointment, magical foot ointment. Actually, I have a slide for this, don't I? Yeah, so this is at the very end. Weapons and magical feet and invisibility. Alchemy is really interesting when I'm doing a research project on this right now. So turning baser metals into gold. This is the philosopher's stone, right? This is what alchemists have been searching for years, and it goes to show this was also happening in Asia as well, all over Eurasia, we could say. Power to fly, travel, power to visit nether worlds. We could feel uncomfortable about this, right? We sort of have been, we've grown up in a society where magic is less than religion and religion is less than science. And this doesn't belong in proper religion, right? Just like when the Christian missionaries first saw these things, like, devil worshippers, how dare you? And yet, because this is transgressive, because this is secret, things like magic show up all over the place. And so we're going to talk more about magic next time. So if this is interesting to you, we can continue with it next week. So why don't we drop it off here? As you can see, I've got some quotes. You can go through the slides yourself and kind of work through the quotes, make sure you understand them. But that's the gist of it, is basically we have these different sorts of meditation practice. We've got some meditation that's adapted for our modern capitalist society. And then we also have meditation practices that are adapted to achieve enlightenment in this life, along with all the other magical powers that people have wanted to gain probably since forever, right? So there's a power here. What is the takeaway for Tantric Buddhism? It is power. You want to become powerful, and there are tools to become powerful. It is promising you power. And so we might, again, feel uncomfortable with that. We live in a society where we are not supposed to become power hungry. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. We live in a world of exploitation. Whenever somebody has too much power in a hierarchy, we think, oh, they're probably going to exploit some people. But this is, the promise at least, is an enlightened form of power. So I encourage you to stretch beyond your usual boundaries of comfort and think, is it possible to be both powerful and compassionate? Is that possible? Because that's what is being promised here. Okay, we can pick up on this next time. I hope you enjoyed my video. Click, comment, like, subscribe. Isn't that what people say? All right, so I'll see you all on Monday, which is a long time from now. So have a good weekend, have a good rest of the week, and I'll see you Monday. All right, take care.